This one is pretty heavy, not gonna lie. We're diving into a familicide case. It's out of Fall City, Washington. It's, one of those stories that just sticks with you, full of twists and turns. We've got court documents, 911 calls, forensic reports, like the whole 9 yards.
It's really intriguing. This case, we're looking at it through the lens of the sole survivor,
Yeah.
an 11-year-old girl who not only escaped this, just unthinkable event, but she's also a key witness
Yeah.
in the legal battle ahead.
It's crazy. The Humiston family, we've got Mark, 43, Sarah, 42, and their kids, Catherine, 7, Joshua, 9, and Benjamin, he was 13. They were all victims. And it's her account, along with some really, really jarring inconsistencies at the crime scene that kind of throws the whole initial narrative for a loop.
Absolutely. Yeah, and those conflicting 911 calls, that's just the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a puzzle where the pieces just don't quite fit.
Exactly. So let's start with what this young girl went through. Imagine witnessing the murder of your father and your brother, being shot yourself, and then having the presence of mind to play dead and escape through a window. I mean, that takes a lot of, I can't even imagine.
The trauma she experienced is it's unimaginable. Children who witness this violence are often burdened with survivor's guilt, PTSD. I mean, a whole host of psychological challenges that can really impact them for years to come.
It's just heartbreaking. And then you add another layer to this whole tragedy. There are these two 911 calls just made minutes apart that paint very, very different pictures of what happened that night.
Yeah, the first call came from the accused, the 15-year-old son.
Okay.
Claimed that his younger brother Benjamin committed the murders and then took his own life
Oh, wow.
after being caught looking at some inappropriate content online. And so, at first glance, it seems like a pretty textbook murder-suicide narrative.
Yeah.
But just minutes later, a neighbor calls 911, relaying what the 11-year-old daughter told them, that her brother was actually the shooter.
So now we have two completely different stories.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really interesting. The forensic evidence just doesn't line up with that initial account from the older brother.
Right. The police found Benjamin with an unfired Glock in his left hand, which we know from the reports was not his dominant hand.
And even more telling is the head wound. The medical examiner's report determined that fatal shot came from over 2 feet away, making it highly unlikely to be self-inflicted.
So it seems like somebody deliberately tried to make this look like a suicide. Are we talking about a staged crime scene?
It really points in that direction. Yeah, the placement of the gun, the nature of the wounds, those are classic signs of someone trying to manipulate the evidence. And this is where it gets really chilling. We know that the 15-year-old had a code to the family gun safe.
But the defense is arguing there was no blood found on the accused. How do you explain that if he was the shooter?
That's a fair point. The absence of visible blood doesn't necessarily exonerate him. It could point to a very meticulous cleanup, or maybe he was wearing gloves. There's also the possibility of other trace evidence, like gunshot residue, that could link him to the scene. It's really up to the forensics team to find those missing pieces.
So we've got conflicting accounts, a suspicious crime scene. It all seems to point away from the 13-year-old and toward the older brother. But what would drive a 15-year-old to commit such a horrific act?
It's a million-dollar question, isn't it? The alleged motive,
Right.
punishing his brother for viewing adult content. I mean, it seems almost too simple, too juvenile, I guess you could say, to trigger such extreme violence.
Yeah, exactly. It feels like there's something we're missing here, like a big piece of the puzzle. Are we dealing with something deeper? Mental health issues, family dynamics we don't know about, something like that.
Possibly, yeah. And unfortunately, this case, it isn't an isolated incident. Juvenile homicide is a growing concern across the country.
What's driving that trend?
Well, there are a number of factors at play. My research has shown a strong correlation between exposure to violence, whether it's in the home or in the media, and an increased likelihood of violent behavior in young people.
So it's a cycle? Like violence begets violence?
Sadly, yes. And then you have to consider the role of mental health. Undiagnosed or untreated mental illness can be a significant factor in these cases.
What about access to firearms? I mean, we hear about that a lot these days.
Absolutely, yeah. Easy access to firearms, especially in homes with children, it greatly increases the risk of impulsive acts of violence.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but it's one we need to understand better, especially as we follow the legal proceedings in this case. This 15-year-old is facing some incredibly serious charges.
Yeah, he's been charged with 5 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of attempted murder.
Wow.
The decision of whether to try him as an adult or juvenile, I mean, that will have major implications for his future.
In Washington state, the age of release for juveniles is 25. So if he's tried as an adult, we're looking at a potential life sentence. But if he's tried as a minor, he could be released by the time he's 25. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a tough call.
Yeah.
There's a lot of debate surrounding the appropriate way to handle juvenile offenders,
Hmm.
especially in cases involving such serious crimes. Do we prioritize punishment or do we prioritize rehabilitation?
It's a real balancing act for sure. And we have to consider the impact on, on everyone involved, not just the accused.
Right. The surviving daughter, the extended family, the community. I mean, they're all victims in this tragedy. And the legal system has a responsibility to ensure that justice is served, but also to protect the rights and well-being of everyone involved.
And speaking of the surviving daughter, she's the key witness in this case. Can you talk about the challenges she might face navigating the legal system, especially at such a young age?
Absolutely. Testifying in court can be incredibly daunting, even for adults. For a child who has already endured so much trauma, I mean, it can be re-traumatizing.
So what kind of support systems are in place to kind of help her through this?
Fortunately, there are provisions in place to protect child victims and witnesses.
Okay, good. What are some examples of that?
Well, for starters, she may have the option to testify remotely, via video link, rather than having to face her brother in court.
Right.
This can help reduce anxiety and minimize the potential for further trauma. She'll also be assigned a victim advocate, someone who can provide emotional support and guidance throughout the legal process.
That's crucial. But she's not alone in this, right? Her maternal grandmother is now her guardian. That must be an incredibly difficult situation for everyone.
Absolutely. The grandmother is facing a seemingly impossible task, trying to support her granddaughter while also grappling with the fact that her grandson is the accused.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking for everyone involved.
It's a powerful reminder that these cases are about more than just, legal proceedings. They're about real people, real families, real communities struggling to cope with unimaginable loss and trauma. And it's a reminder that we need to look beyond the headlines and really understand the complex human stories at the heart of these tragedies.
Makes you wonder about the systems we have in place.
Yeah.
For preventing these kinds of tragedies and for supporting the survivors. My work on domestic violence cases in Italy has really opened my eyes to some different approaches.
You've mentioned that before. It sounds fascinating. How does their system differ from ours?
Well, one key difference is in how they handle the initial complaints. Here in the U.S., when someone reports domestic violence to the police, there's a level of discretion involved.
Right.
The officers, they might investigate further, or they might just dismiss the claim. Or maybe refer the person to other services. It's not always consistent.
So there's room for bias or misjudgment to kind of creep in there, potentially?
Exactly, yeah. But in Italy, things work a bit differently. Any case involving domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, anything in that realm, it has to automatically be forwarded to the prosecutor's office for review. The police don't have the authority to just drop it.
Wow, that's a big difference. So it takes the decision out of their hands and puts it directly into the hands of a legal expert.
Precisely. The goal is to ensure that every single case gets a thorough evaluation by someone specifically trained to assess these situations. It minimizes the risk of a case falling through the cracks, simply because a particular officer didn't deem it, serious enough.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. But I imagine there are drawbacks to that approach as well, right? I mean, it can't be a perfect system.
Of course not, no.
Yeah.
One potential downside is that it can really slow down the process, considerably.
Oh, yeah. I bet.
Prosecutors are now burdened with reviewing every single complaint that comes in, even those that might seem, minor or lack strong evidence.
It sounds like a trade-off then. More thoroughness, but at the expense of efficiency.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It highlights the challenge of designing any justice system, really. There are always going to be pros and cons. And the goal is to find that sweet spot where you're maximizing fairness and safety without creating undue burdens,
It definitely adds another layer to our discussion about this case in Fall City. We've got this young girl who's been through, hell and back, a community reeling from the shock of this crime, and a legal system trying to navigate all the complexities of a juvenile offender.
It's important to remember that while we're discussing, legal theories and forensic evidence, at the heart of it all is a deeply human story. A family torn apart, a young girl grappling with unimaginable loss, a community struggling to comprehend the senseless.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder that these aren't just abstract cases. These are real lives, real people whose worlds have been shattered. And the stakes in this particular case, I mean, they couldn't be higher.
It brings us back to that central question we keep circling. What led to this? We've looked at the crime scene, we've discussed the legal aspects, we've touched on broader societal trends, but that why, it still feels elusive.
We have the accused's version of events, claiming that his brother snapped over being caught viewing pornography. But honestly, does that truly explain such extreme violence? I mean,
It's hard to believe that something seemingly so minor could trigger this level of rage and brutality.
mhm.
We have to dig deeper, consider all the potential contributing factors.
Like those underlying issues we talked about earlier, mental health struggles, family dynamics, maybe even just, the immense pressures of adolescence.
Exactly. And it's crucial to avoid jumping to conclusions.
Yeah.
We need to let the investigation unfold, let the facts guide us.
But while we wait for those facts to emerge, it's also important to use this case as a springboard for broader conversations. What does it tell us about, the challenges families face today? What resources are lacking? How can we as a society get better at addressing the root causes of violence, especially among young people?
Those are the questions that matter in the long run. We need to
Yeah.
move beyond the shock and the horror and channel that energy into meaningful action.
That means supporting organizations that work with victims of crime, advocating for better mental health resources, educating ourselves and our communities about the warning signs. It's about taking a proactive approach to prevention rather than simply reacting to tragedy after the fact.
It's about creating a culture where we don't just punish those who commit violent acts, but we actually address the factors that lead to those acts in the first place. It's about creating a society that's more supportive, more understanding, more equipped to intervene before things escalate to this level.
And that brings us back to this young girl, the survivor at the center of this case. Her story, as heartbreaking as it is, can be a powerful catalyst for change.
Absolutely. She's a symbol of resilience, of the human capacity to endure even the most horrific circumstances. But she's also a reminder of the ongoing work we have to do to create a world where children are safe, protected, and supported.
And that means ensuring that she gets the help she needs to heal, to process this trauma, and to build a life that honors the memory of her family, while also looking forward with hope.
It's about recognizing that the impact of this crime extends far beyond the immediate victims.
Yeah.
It ripples outwards, affecting the entire community, and even those of us observing from a distance.
It challenges us to ask ourselves, what role do we play in creating a safer world? What can we do individually and collectively to prevent these tragedies from happening again and again?
It forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that these events, as shocking as they are, they're not isolated incidents. They're part of a larger pattern, a systemic issue that demands our attention, our empathy, and our action.
And perhaps in grappling with these, difficult questions and confronting the darkness, we can find a way to move towards a brighter future, a future where stories like this one are the exception, not the rule. It's hard to imagine what that future looks like for this 11-year-old girl. I mean, she lost her entire immediate family, her home, her sense of security, everything familiar, really, and now she has to face this legal system that, I mean, it's designed to protect her, but it can also feel incredibly intimidating, especially at such a young age.
It's a really difficult balance,
Yeah.
trying to uphold her rights
Yeah.
while also prioritizing her emotional well-being. The option to testify remotely, that's a good step.
Yeah.
But it's just one small piece of the puzzle. This girl needs comprehensive support,
Mm-hmm.
and she needs it for the long haul.
What does that look like in practical terms?
Well, first and foremost, she needs access to ongoing therapy. Trauma like this, it doesn't just fade away. It can manifest in countless ways: nightmares, flashbacks, anxiety, depression. She'll need professional help to process what she's been through and develop those healthy coping mechanisms.
And it's not just professional help, right? I mean, she needs a strong support system in her personal life as well.
Absolutely, yeah. That's where her grandmother comes in. She's facing an incredibly challenging role.
Hmm.
Not only trying to provide a stable and loving home for her granddaughter, but also dealing with the fact that her grandson is the accused. It's a level of heartbreak and complexity that I mean, most of us can't even fathom.
It really makes you think about the ripple effects of this crime. You know, it's not just the immediate victims, but this entire network of people around them, family, friends, neighbor. I mean, even the first responders who witnessed the scene firsthand.
Trauma. It spreads like a virus. And we can't forget about the community as a whole. You know, a tragedy like this, it shakes people to their core. It forces them to confront their own vulnerability, their own fears.
It's a stark reminder that these things can happen anywhere to anyone, and it can make people feel so powerless.
It's essential to acknowledge those feelings,
Yeah.
to validate them. But it's also crucial to remember that we're not helpless. You know, there are things we can do, both individually and collectively, to create a safer, more compassionate world.
So what can we do? Where do we even start?
Well, we start by supporting organizations that work with victims of crime, advocating for stronger mental health resources, and educating ourselves in our communities about the warning signs of violence.
Right.
We need to move beyond simply reacting to tragedies and start focusing on proactive prevention.
We've talked about the role of mental health, access to firearms, the influence of violence in media. I mean, these are all complex issues, but ignoring them, I mean, it won't make them go away.
And it's not just about, large-scale societal change. It's about those small everyday acts of kindness and compassion that can make a difference in someone's life. It's about checking in on our friends and neighbors, offering support to those who are struggling, and speaking up when we see something that isn't right.
It's about recognizing that we're all interconnected, and that the well-being of one person affects the well-being of us all.
Exactly. And in the face of this horrific tragedy, in the midst of all the pain and uncertainty, I think that's where we find hope in our collective capacity for empathy, for action, for choosing to believe that a better world is possible.
This deep dive has been heavy, no doubt about it, but it's also been incredibly insightful. You know, we've explored the forensic details, the legal complexities, the psychological impact, the broader societal implications of this case, and I think we've all come away with a deeper understanding of not only what happened in Falls City, but also what we can do to prevent similar tragedies from happening in the future.
And sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply listen, learn, and refuse to look away.
Yeah.
Because awareness is the first step towards change.
This case, it challenges us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about our society, and about the systems we rely on to protect the most vulnerable among us. It's a reminder that we can't afford to be complacent, that we all have a role to play in creating a world where every child feels safe, supported, and empowered to reach their full potential.
It's a tall order, but it's a goal worth striving for, and it starts with each of us, right here, right now.